The cold reached me before the silence did, creeping across the floor like something alive. It pressed against my ankles the moment I stepped into the living room, as if the house itself had noticed I was there. I remember thinking that no place should feel that aware. The house had been empty for years, left to me without explanation after my uncle's sudden death. No one in the family wanted it, and now I understood why. Even in daylight, it felt like something inside was waiting. The fireplace stood at the far end of the room, sealed with uneven stones that didn't match the rest of the wall. Dust coated everything, yet those stones looked disturbed, as if they had been touched recently. A faint draft slipped through the cracks, cold enough to sting. At first I blamed broken windows or hidden gaps in the walls. Old houses breathed in strange ways, or at least that's what I told myself. But this felt different, like the air was being pushed out deliberately. That night, the temperature dropped even further, but only near the fireplace. I could stand in the center of the room and feel normal, yet one step closer brought that unnatural chill. It was as if the cold had boundaries. Then came the sound, soft at first, like fingernails brushing against stone. I froze, listening carefully, trying to convince myself it was pipes or settling wood. But the noise had rhythm, slow and deliberate. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined something behind the wall, waiting for silence so it could continue. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. The next morning, I examined the fireplace more closely. The stones weren't just uneven, they were packed in hastily as though someone had sealed something away in a hurry. There were scratches along the edges, thin but deep. I ran my fingers along one of the grooves, feeling how sharp it still was. Whatever made those marks had been desperate. The thought settled heavily in my chest. Later that evening, the sound returned, louder this time. It wasn't just scratching anymore, but a dull tapping, like knuckles hitting from the other side. Each knock echoed through the hollow inside. I stepped closer, heart pounding, trying to steady my breathing. The cold wrapped around me instantly, thicker than before, like stepping into freezing water. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, right against the stone, something knocked back. I told myself I wouldn't touch the stones, but the idea had already taken hold. That knock from the other side didn't feel like a coincidence, and it didn't feel like imagination either. It felt like an answer. Morning light did nothing to ease the tension coiled in my chest. The fireplace looked ordinary again, quiet and still, as if nothing had happened at all. But the cold remained, faint and persistent. I tried to busy myself with unpacking, forcing normalcy into a place that rejected it. Boxes scraped across the floor, and the sound echoed too loudly in the empty house. Every noise seemed to wake something unseen. Still, my eyes kept drifting back to the fireplace. The stones seemed more out of place the longer I stared at them. It was like they didn't belong to the wall at all. By afternoon, curiosity had begun to outweigh fear. I crouched in front of the hearth, studying the mortar between the stones. It was cracked and brittle, far newer than the surrounding brick. Whoever sealed it hadn't meant for it to last forever. That realization sat uneasily in my mind. It almost felt like an invitation. I fetched a small hammer and chisel from the garage, my hands trembling more than I wanted to admit. The tools felt heavier than they should have, as if they carried consequence with them. I hesitated before striking the first blow. The sound rang out sharply, echoing through the house like a warning. Dust fell from the stone, drifting slowly in the air. I froze, listening for a response from within. Nothing came at first, just silence pressing in from all sides. Then faintly I heard it again, scratching, closer than before. It stopped the moment I leaned in to listen. I struck again, harder this time, breaking a small piece free. The crack revealed darkness behind it, deeper than the shallow space I had expected. A cold gust slipped through the opening and brushed against my face. The air smelled wrong, stale and damp, like something long buried. It carried a faint metallic scent that made my stomach turn. I pulled back instinctively, heart racing. But instead of stopping, I kept going. Stone after stone loosened, each one revealing more of that unnatural void behind the wall. And with every piece I removed, the silence behind it felt less empty and more awake. The final stone came loose with a dull crack, and the wall seemed to exhale. A rush of cold air poured out, thick and suffocating, carrying the stench of rot and something older. I stumbled back, choking as the darkness behind the fireplace revealed itself. The opening was larger than I expected, wide enough for a person to crawl through. It swallowed the light from the room, turning my flashlight beam into a thin, fragile thread. The space beyond felt endless. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring into it. Every instinct told me to seal it back up and walk away, but the silence from within felt deliberate, like something was waiting for me to make the next move. I knelt slowly, bringing the flashlight closer to the opening. The beam trembled in my hand, catching rough stone walls that stretched inward at a slight downward angle. Dust clung to everything, undisturbed for years. At the edge of the passage, I noticed markings carved into the stone. They weren't decorative or careful, but jagged and frantic. Deep grooves overlapped each other in chaotic patterns. I traced one with my eyes, realizing they resembled scratch marks more than symbols. They ran along the walls, converging toward the entrance as if something had tried to claw its way out. The deeper I looked, the more violent they seemed. The floor inside was uneven, scattered with small debris and brittle fragments that crunched softly under pressure. Some of the pieces looked like old wood, splintered and decayed. Others were harder to identify in the dim light. A faint sound drifted from deeper within, barely audible over my breathing. It wasn't scratching this time, but something slower, like a distant shifting weight. It made the narrow passage feel even tighter. I pulled back instinctively, my shoulder brushing against the fireplace edge. The house behind me felt suddenly far away, as if the opening had swallowed more than just space. Even the air in the room seemed thinner. For a moment, I considered covering it again, stacking the stones back where they had been. The thought of leaving it open filled me with unease, but the idea of not knowing what lay beyond it was worse. I leaned in once more, forcing myself closer to the threshold. The cold wrapped around my face, sharper now, almost biting. My breath fogged in front of me despite the warmth of the room behind. From the darkness, something shifted again, closer this time. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable, and in that instant, I realized the passage hadn't just been hiding something, it had been holding it back. I don't remember deciding to go inside, only realizing that I already had. The flashlight beam cut a thin path through the darkness as I lowered myself into the passage. Behind me, the living room felt distant, like a place I had already left behind. The air grew colder with each inch forward, pressing tightly against my skin. It was thick and damp, filling my lungs with something that didn't feel like air at all. Every breath tasted stale and wrong. The passage sloped downward, forcing me to crouch as I moved. The walls closed in on either side, rough stone scraping against my shoulders. It felt less like entering a tunnel and more like being swallowed. I kept the light steady, trying to focus on something real. The beam revealed more scratches along the walls, deeper and more erratic the farther I went. Some gouges were so deep they chipped away pieces of stone. There was a pattern to them, but not one that made sense. They twisted and overlapped as if made in panic over a long period of time. The thought of something trapped down here made my chest tighten. My foot brushed against something brittle, and a sharp crack echoed through the passage. I froze, the sound ringing louder than it should have. It took a moment before I dared to look down. Bones lay scattered across the ground, small and fragmented, half buried in dust. Some looked animal, but others didn't quite match anything I recognized. They had been here a long time. A faint noise drifted from ahead, pulling my attention back into the darkness. It was slow and uneven, like something dragging itself across the floor. The sound seemed to respond to my movement. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and moved forward again. The beam flickered briefly, threatening to leave me in complete darkness. Panic surged through me before the light steadied again. The passage opened slightly into a wider section, though it offered no comfort. The walls here were covered in thicker marks, layered so heavily they almost formed a texture. Some of them looked fresh. I crouched lower, heart pounding, as the air grew colder still. The smell intensified, metallic and sour, clinging to the back of my throat. It felt like something had died here, or never left. Then, just beyond the edge of my light, something shifted. It wasn't the settling of stone or the fall of debris, but something deliberate. And for the first time since entering, I realized I wasn't alone down there. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I pushed it farther into the widened chamber. The darkness didn't retreat the way it should have, as if it had weight and resisted the light. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back, but my legs refused. The space opened into a crude room carved from the earth itself. The ceiling arched low and uneven, dripping with moisture that fell in slow, echoing drops. Each sound felt amplified, like the chamber was listening. Chains hung from the far wall, rusted and stiff, their ends bolted deep into the stone. Some were broken, snapped apart with jagged force that didn't look human. Others still swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. The floor beneath them was darker, stained in irregular patches that spread outward. I didn't need to get closer to understand what they were. The metallic smell in the air confirmed it. Symbols had been carved into the surrounding walls, circling the room in uneven patterns. They weren't like the frantic scratches in the passage, but deliberate and repeated. Whoever made them had taken their time. I stepped closer despite myself, drawn to the markings. My light passed over them, revealing shapes that seemed to shift the longer I looked. They weren't familiar, yet they carried a sense of purpose. Something scraped softly behind me. I turned quickly, the beam swinging back toward the passage. The narrow tunnel stretched empty, but the sound didn't feel distant anymore. When I turned back, one of the chains moved. It was subtle, just a slight twitch, but enough to freeze me in place. The air seemed to tighten around me, pressing in from all sides. A low sound rose from somewhere within the chamber. Not quite a growl, not quite a breath. It vibrated through the stone beneath my feet, deep and unnatural. My chest tightened as it grew louder. The darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight shifted again. This time I saw it, something pulling itself forward just outside the light. Its shape was wrong, bending in ways that didn't follow any living form. I stumbled back, my foot slipping on the uneven floor. The flashlight beam jerked wildly, catching glimpses of movement that vanished the moment I tried to focus. The chains rattled softly, as if disturbed by its passing. Then the light landed on it for a fraction of a second. Pale, stretched skin clung to something too thin, its limbs dragging unnaturally across the ground, and its face, if it could be called that, turned toward me with recognition. I didn't wait to see it clearly again, because something in its movement told me I wouldn't survive if I did. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, scrambling backward toward the narrow passage. The chamber seemed to pulse behind me, as if it had finally woken. The thing moved faster than it should have, its dragging sound turning into something sharper. Chains rattled violently as it passed, striking stone with a metallic scream. I could feel it closing the distance without needing to look. I forced myself into the passage, my shoulders scraping hard against the walls. The flashlight beam shook wildly, barely holding steady as I crawled upward. Every breath came out ragged and uneven. Behind me, something struck the entrance of the chamber with a wet, heavy sound. It didn't follow immediately, and that hesitation felt worse than pursuit. It was as if it was deciding something. Then it came. The scraping grew louder, faster, filling the passage with a suffocating rhythm. Stone chipped and cracked as it forced its way through the narrow space. The walls around me trembled with each movement it made. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the pain tearing through my arms and knees. The cold seemed to chase me, wrapping tighter around my body. It felt like something reaching forward, not just following. The passage stretched longer than I remembered, twisting slightly as panic blurred my sense of direction. My light flickered again, threatening to abandon me completely. For a second, everything went dark. In that darkness, I heard it right behind me. A wet breath brushed against my leg, slow and deliberate. I kicked out instinctively, feeling something recoil. The light returned in a violent flicker, revealing the entrance to the fireplace just ahead. I lunged forward, dragging myself out into the living room. Warm air hit me like a shock. I didn't stop to think as I grabbed the fallen stones. One by one, I shoved them back into place, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. The opening felt too wide, too exposed. From the other side, something slammed against the wall. The impact cracked the newly placed stones, sending dust into the air. A low, distorted sound pushed through the gaps, almost like a voice trying to form words. I backed away slowly, heart pounding as the house fell into silence again. The cold didn't fade this time, it spread, seeping beyond the fireplace and into every corner of the room. And somewhere behind me, deeper in the house, I heard a new sound. Something moving where nothing had been before. I told myself it was over, that sealing the passage had trapped it again. But the silence that followed felt wrong, heavier than before. It wasn't the quiet of absence, but the quiet of something hiding. The temperature in the room kept dropping, even hours after I blocked the opening. Frost began to creep along the edges of the stones, thin and spreading. It shouldn't have been possible, not inside a closed house. I tried to leave that night, grabbing my keys with shaking hands. But when I reached the front door, it wouldn't open. The handle turned, yet something on the other side pressed back. A soft sound echoed from behind me, somewhere deeper in the house. It was the same dragging noise I had heard below, slower now, more deliberate. It was no longer confined to the passage. I turned slowly, my chest tightening as the darkness in the hallway seemed thicker than before. The air carried that same metallic scent, faint but unmistakable. It had followed me out. The fireplace stones shifted slightly behind me. Not enough to fall, just enough to remind me they were no longer holding anything. Whatever had been sealed, there wasn't trying to escape anymore, because it already had.